I will let them in, Kitty, so you can take the lead. So I'm going to start by saying good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third roundtable on shelter and homelessness session. And always we say this is a roundtable, so this is to encourage, discussion and raise awareness on the topic. So feel free to ask questions and challenge us with thoughts or ideas. And even later on, if you can contact us separately, that's also fine. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So I'm the co-chair for this roundtable. I also, my colleague Sam Maddox, who couldn't make it today, is the other co-chair. I'm not going to go to presentation mode on the slides. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yep. And this particular roundtable is talking about the typology, which is throughout at least my career, and I don't know everybody else, we work on different type of buildings, and that requires different type of design and requirements. And rarely we come across this type of typology. So it's very demanding, and it can cross over between other typologies that some of us are aware of and worked with. I think I listed like institutional in terms of healthcare, or correctional facility, or even hospitality. It's like a dormitory type of typology. And we have a really nice, great panelist presenting today. Josh O'Brien, he is a Pine Street and Senior Director, Emergency Shelters in Boston. He will be talking about Pine and Street operation and types of housing that they have. And then we have, thankfully for Kitty Ryan, founding principal of the Narrow Gate Architecture, join us today. She's been working in this type of building for a very long time, and really thank you for your time and your firm. Join us also Mariah Arato Gavresh, a designer, on this topic as well. So I'm gonna stop here and give the screen to Kitty and Josh to get started. And thank you all for joining us.
Great. Thank you, John, for that nice introduction. So I'm sharing my screen. The same, you can see the participants that are here today. We're really excited to be here. I'm going to offer it to Josh first to do his piece, which really sets the stage for all of our projects, and then we'll do some introductions, Mariah and I, and then we'll get into our projects.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kitty, and thank you, everyone. Great to see you again. For those who were here at the last roundtable, again, my name is Josh, and I work for the Pine Street. I've been with Pine Street for about 8 years. Currently, as the Senior Director of Emergency Shelters, I kind of work with all of our shelters, which are 5 across the city. And before that, for a long time, served as the shelter administrator for the city of Portland, Maine, where we had both family and individual shelters. So really excited to be with you today, and thought I'd just frame our conversation a little bit, talking about the context of shelter in the Commonwealth. We have 4 main types of shelter. Talking about overnight shelter, because there's day shelter as well. We have youth shelters, which are usually 14 to 24-year-olds, although they could be serving folks who are younger. We have shelters who specialize in domestic and partner violence. We have individual shelters like Pine Street Inn, and then we have family shelters. And you might think the family shelters with serving those with children would be easier or more accessible. It's actually, our systems are quite different in terms of point of entry. For family shelters, you need to go to one of the state offices during business hours, prove your Massachusetts residency, go through an income qualification. You need to show, and this is in quotes, that you have what they call needy children under the age of 21, or that you're pregnant, and that typically means you're really close to giving birth. Most folks that are earlier in their pregnancies are sent to the adult shelters, and that they determine you have no fault in your loss of housing or causing your own homelessness. So it can be a really stressful process for families, but for individuals like those we serve at Pine Street Inn, we have a low barrier approach, which basically means come as you are, and you don't have to have solved all your issues before getting into shelter. We just kind of take folks where they're at. If you're over 18 and you're literally homeless, it's pretty much that simple in shelters across Massachusetts. Most are year-round shelters in Massachusetts, but some are winter-based as well. So for Pine Street Inn, again, we serve those who are literally homeless and 18 years of age or older. So we do overlap a little bit with all of the other categories except for children under the age of 18. We have 5 shelters currently. We have our Women's Inn, which is in the South End on Albany Street, that Kitty will talk about in a little bit. And we have 4 floors and 81 guests served at that site. We have our Men's Inn also at the South End, also across 4 large floors, and we serve 170 guests. Our Holy Family Inn, which is in Dorchester, which serves 47 guests. Our Shattuck Shelter, which is on the grounds of the Lemuel Shattuck Hospital in Jamaica Plain, with serving 30 guests currently. And then we have a temporary shelter, which was open to help depopulate the other shelters to create more social distancing during the COVID pandemic. We have 100 guests able to have beds in that shelter. It's a hotel, if you're familiar with Soldiers Field Road. It's over between the McDonald's and the IHOP on your way towards the Arsenal Mall, if it's even still called that. Pre-COVID, so that's about 400 guests per night currently. Pre-COVID, we're well over 800 guests a night. Sometimes just our Men's Inn, we'd be serving over 500 guests just in that one location. So again, we're low barrier, which means we work with pretty much anybody that comes to us seeking shelter, and we immediately work on, for those that are that enter the shelter, on creating a supportive housing pathway using a housing first approach. And just wanted to talk for 60 seconds on housing first. So housing first is a strategy first implemented in the early 1990s, and it was implemented in New York City, and really was a change from a housing readiness approach, or being housing ready. And that housing readiness approach forced individuals who were experiencing homelessness to tick off a number of boxes before they qualified for, if there was even housing available. So maybe you had to be sober, you had to participate and be engaged in services, maybe you had to be on your medication, have practiced some life skills, maybe taken some money management classes. And then once you checked all those boxes based on your case manager's determination, then you kind of qualified to kind of move on, and you were good enough for housing. So this housing first change was really important, because it really said that you don't have to solve everyone's life problems, or you don't, as an individual, have to solve your own life problems before qualifying for housing, and as we think of it as a right and something that everybody deserves. So it was a really important change in the philosophy. The old model, the housing readiness model, was based on a psychiatric hospital approach, so the step up or step down theory, and was outdated. So Pine Street was an early adopter of the housing first approach, and is now seen as a national model for implementing housing first. And through that housing first approach, we help to bring over 1,000 individuals every year out of homelessness, and between our shelter and housing programs serve over 1,400 individuals a day. So for Pine Street housing, it can look very, very different depending on any of our programs. It can be supporting a guest or a former guest of the shelter, or right from the street in a market rate apartment in the community with a private landlord, to one of the 36 locations in Boston or Greater Boston that PSI owns or manages, that range from very small programs to very large congregate programs, and some transitional safe havens, which I think you'll see some of that in Kitty's presentation as well. Some are veteran specific, others are general. So it can really, we have a little bit of everything for everybody. And then there are many programs that are outside of Pine Street, and we still have teams that will support those individuals in their housing. And again, about 1,000 individuals moving out of homelessness and into permanent housing every year. But even before we get to the housing side, when somebody presents for shelter, and before they even start on that housing journey, everyone who we meet with, who tries to enter the shelter, meets with a specialist first to make sure that shelter is the only option. We want to look at any other safe alternative to shelter. Our goal is not to bring people into shelter. It's actually to create opportunities for individuals to not have to be in the shelter at all. And we know that one night in the shelter is traumatic. It can cause feelings of shame and loss, further someone's substance use or mental health concerns, and often increases disconnection to family and friends. So we want to try and avoid that if at all possible. We have an amazing team that works just on that. And about 1/3 of the individuals that walk up to the door and seek shelter, we're able to work with, so they never have to set foot inside the actual shelter, which is fantastic. And we hope that increases. But for those who truly have no other options, and this is where Kitty and her team come in, we work really hard to collaboratively design, improve spaces that are safe, dignified, well-kept, well-staffed, so that each of our guests, really hundreds every single night and thousands every single year, are served in good spaces and start on their journey to permanent housing. And Pine Street has been continuously operating shelters for over 50 years. So if anybody's been up to Freeport, Maine and LL Bean, they don't have locks on the door. We probably could have done the same. Been operating every night of the year for 50 plus years. So proud to be with Pine Street, super proud to partner with Kitty and her team and many of you. And I will turn it over to Kitty.
Thank you, Josh. It's really inspiring to share a panel with you and to be reminded again what great work Pine Street does. So I'm going to flip to our next slide, maybe. So this always happens, right? There we are. So we started the Narrow Gate. Again, I'm Kitty Ryan, and we started the Narrow Gate in 1987. And our mission was to use our architectural services to benefit people who needed it, and people who are on the margins in our society. It's really all we wanted to do, and in our great luck, it's all we have done in the last 35 years. So our projects have included affordable housing, supportive housing, and community-based projects, all benefiting people, that need it. And it's been such a rich experience for us. Mariah, we'll talk a little bit about it too. It's wonderful to work with Mariah. We're working with like-minded architects, our team together. And we're also working with wonderful people like Josh, who are so dedicated to making life better for people that carry a lot of burdens. And we learn from Pine Street and others. And actually 25 of our 35 years, we've worked with Pine Street. So we've done numerous permanent supportive housing projects, and more recently, the last several years, these innovative programs within the shelter that we'll show you. And we're learning every day, like how will our design support, Josh's work? How will our design support ideas like safety and privacy and dignity and community? All the things that we want to have come out of our project. So we're really happy to be here, and thanks for being interested in our work. Mariah.
Yeah, I'll just share a little bit more about the Narrow Gate. We currently have a staff of 14. This picture shows our team and some family members from this past December outside celebrating the retirement of one of our coworkers. Luckily, it was a little bit milder of a day, but hard to celebrate things sometimes during COVID and in the winter. We have a wide array of projects currently in progress in our office, in addition to a lot of different projects underway with Pine Street. I've been part of the project team working on 2 projects with Alston Brighton Community Development Corporation, and one of which will be serving people coming out of addiction recovery treatment. We also have construction has started on the Holbrook Center Senior Housing, which is a 72 unit affordable project with NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. And then lastly, I want to mention that with a partnership with Wayfinders, we were recently selected by the town of Amherst, Massachusetts, to design 70 new units across 2 sites, which will serve a range of incomes with primarily affordable units. So we have a wide array of sizes and types of projects. And today we're going to share projects that focus on serving people who are experiencing homelessness. And we've sort of broken the projects up into 3 categories: emergency shelter, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing. So throughout the presentation, feel free to speak up, or if you want to drop questions in the chat, so we can, so you don't forget them, so we can keep track of them for the discussion after the presentation. That would be great. And I'll pass it back to Kitty to start sharing some of the emergency shelter projects.
Thanks, Mariah. Oh gosh, I hope it's not like this all evening.
I think you might just be like not in the PowerPoint application, like it might have gone into Zoom if you just
There we go. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So I'm going to start by talking, we have 3 projects we want to show you in the emergency shelter category. This first one is at the Women's Inn for Pine Street, this kind of handsome 4-story brick building, which sort of bookends the Pine Street campus. It's on Albany Street. Its first floor, which you can see the plan of on the right here, is its entry area, gathering space, dining, a place for women to wait for the sleeping spaces to be opened upstairs. There's a medical clinic. There's staff to talk to, and so the outline in red was our one of our most recent projects with Pine Street. The challenge was to redesign the entry so that it would be more appropriate for people who have experienced trauma. You can see it's a little bit tight, the entry there. There's kind of a narrow space in front of a long reception desk. Another goal was also to have women go through security in a more thorough way, but also a less invasive way. And also to create a space for new guests or people who had been away for 30 days or more to meet with someone in triage, like Josh was talking about, to be able to find an alternative to coming into the shelter itself. So it's a little light here, but on the left you can see the existing again, and the one center entry and a tight vestibule, and this is where everyone had come in before. Now we've redesigned the space so that there's a big wide glass entry here, a sliding glass door, and there's 2 ways to come in. If you're a guest, you'll come in this lower area and walk through a scanner machine, much like at the airport. Put your bag down, pass through. People who are visiting or staff would come through this other doorway. The reception area has been reduced, and Pine Street found a way to use the space in a way that worked for them, but also gave more space for the security and gathering. And here's the triage office now that, again, new guests can come and speak with someone before having to automatically go into shelter. Here's some pictures of before on the left. You can see it's a little bit narrow. The long reception desk. This is a security screen that comes down. And on the right is the new, almost ready to be moved into, right, Josh? Any minute now, the new entry. So we have room for the security equipment. Here's the smaller but more open reception area, and the triage office is back in the back here. And we wanted to update the finishes also, make it refreshed, and also have it be a welcoming and kind of warm entry. So that's just about to be occupied. Our next project is in the Men's Inn, and much like the Women's Inn, the first floor, the ground floor, is entry, gathering, dining, waiting to come to the dormitories on the upper floors, medical clinic, and staff. This is a picture of a plan of a typical dorm floor. Floors 2 through 4 are the dormitories, and you can see the layout of the beds here. One of our projects with Pine Street was to help Josh and others try to figure out how many people could fit with more spacing than they had previously because of COVID. So that's what you're seeing here. But a really innovative project that Pine Street came up with and asked for our help with was to create right in the dormitory space, to take a part of that space and make it permanent housing for some guests who had been in the shelter many years, older men, really would not do well in trying to go to housing, independent housing on another site. So it's a way to give them a permanent home within, a very familiar shelter. And what's really wonderful about this space, it's small. There are just 7 occupants, 7 residents, where the shelter guests come in through security and they wait and they come up to the floor. I think it's 4 p.m., right, Josh? Something like that. The guests or the residents here in the SRO, or the single room occupancy, they have their own entry. They can come in whenever they like. It's a 24/7 open to them. This is really their unit. They can share the dining and kitchen areas together. The lounge, they have a shared laundry. They can also go downstairs to the first floor and have a meal in the shelter and visit old friends down there. So this opened right as COVID was happening. I think it was 2020. And here's a picture of just before it was occupied. So it's an open area in the center for the common spaces, and then the bedrooms. You can see the doors along the back here. And I understand that the people are settling in and feeling pretty good there. Do you concur? Is it working out?
Oh, the guests are thrilled. I get a high five from one particular resident almost every single day when I walk through.
That's fantastic.
So yeah, I'm super happy. Very grateful.
Great. Mariah, we'll talk about our next shelter project.
Yeah, so similar to Pine Street, Father Bill's in Mainspring operates under the same philosophy of housing first. They operate more than 600 permanent supportive housing units for formerly homeless individuals, families, and veterans across southern Massachusetts. The Narrow Gate has been working with Father Bill's over the last few years on the Yawkey Housing Resource Center, which is now under construction. You can go to the next slide, Kitty. The $24 million project includes a combination of emergency shelter and permanent supportive housing. There'll be 2 phases. The first phase, which you see labeled on the plans, the lower part of the building, will include 2 stories that will house the shelter beds, a respite facility, a dining room, medical clinic, and offices. And then phase 2 on the top will be a 4-story building that will house more community spaces and offices. And then on the upper floors, 30 supportive housing rental apartments. And we always try to include outdoor spaces with our projects so that the guests and residents of the buildings can spend time outside on nice days like today. The Housing Resource Center includes a secure enclosed courtyard off the dining room, and then phase 2 will also have an outdoor patio and small garden space. And then the renderings on the left show the proposed lobby on the top and the dining room on the bottom left. And then the exterior rendering is sort of showing you where the 2 phases will join together and the courtyard that's in front. So construction just started on that, and we're really excited about that project.
The next project type we're going to talk about, the second of 3, is transitional housing, and that's included safe havens and licensed group residences. Now, the aim of transitional housing is to, it's the kind of the next step from shelter for some people, where it's still temporary, but it's longer than, a 1 bed for a night. It's sometimes up to a couple of years. It's a place for people to be with a great amount of support services, and then they could move on from there to assisted living or independent living. I show this picture of the Emmanuel Church on Newberry Street in Back Bay because many years ago we did an early safe haven in the basement of the church, and I think it's still operating. I don't believe people stay overnight there, but it's for 8 individuals. And the safe haven was created. The program was created by the Department of Mental Health, and it's a housing first model. It's an alternative for people who have been chronically homeless and suffering from major mental illness, and sometimes also substance abuse. There are people that are hard to reach or hard to engage and don't do well in traditional shelters and have experienced trauma. So it's a low barrier program, like many of this housing firsts are, 24/7 staffing, tremendous support services, and again, offering ways for people to gain benefits and a path to the next step in their recovery and in their housing. Safe havens are generally 7 to 12 people in a kind of a home-like environment with their own private room, shared common areas, and they might stay up to about 2 years. In Massachusetts, there are 9 safe havens now, and I know there's a lot of activity to lobby the legislature for funding for more. So there's a safe haven in the works for Pine Street also. Again, I'm showing you the rendering of the Women's Inn. And then this is a typical shelter floor for the Pine Street Women's Inn. This had a lot more beds than you probably have in there now, Josh, but they're little pods of beds, 3 to 7 in each pod, and then a center core with the showers and bathrooms and other utilities. So that's a typical floor. The thought is the safe haven would be on the top floor, and this is just a early rough concept for what might happen here. There's an existing program on the floor now, which is called the WISH program, and if I understand it right, I believe it's very similar to what the men's in SROs is trying to do, which is to give a permanent room for someone who has been in the shelter and needs some additional support to move beyond into permanent housing. So the safe haven we're envisioning here would be maybe 8 or 9 rooms. People have their own key, their own room, it's their unit, and shared common spaces. And again, they'll be able to, we haven't worked out the details, but the idea is they'll be able to come and go as much like the WISH program and the men's SRO. So we're hopeful that this will be happening. And then the third example of transitional housing, we wanted to show you, again, a Pine Street project. Algonquin Street is a licensed group residence. And so this is a little bit different. It's licensed by the Department of Mental Health. It is meant to be group living for individuals suffering from mental illness. Again, a home-like setting. I'm not sure that the residents necessarily come from homelessness. They've been in the Department of Mental Health's care for a while. They need some extra support to in a group living that's staffed 24/7. This is a wonderful shingle-style house in Dorchester that we renovated and added to. You can see the traditional front entry here. We also created a wheelchair accessible side entry without tacking on a sort of a stigma big ramp on the front of the building. We lowered the floor at this entry so that people could wheel right in and then take an elevator to the upper floors. Quick view of the plans here. The ground floor, we actually dug out several feet to get head height enough to have office space and office and conference and storage. We did insert an elevator in the center of the plan, so every floor is accessible. And the first floor is much like any single family home, common dining room and living room, kitchen and bathroom. It does have an office though by the front door. And like safe havens, the medication that would be dispensed from the office is supervised, and the medication is locked away in the office too for safety. On the upper floors, the salmon color are the bedrooms. We have 2 fully accessible bedrooms and 2 adaptable ones. The elevator reaches each floor. And then on the second floor, there's a manager studio. So there's a live-in manager so that if there's something happening in the middle of the night and someone needs assistance, there's always someone there. Here's some interior shots and then kind of a good night shot there from when the program was first opened. And again, the first floor is completely wheelchair accessible. You can see the accessible kitchen. And then, a great old, I can't remember what year it was built, but still wonderful trim and balusters and fireplace. So it's a very warm home. And then our next and last category of housing is permanent supportive housing. And where the others we showed you are temporary from 1 bed for a night or maybe a year or 2, permanent supportive housing is meant to be permanent, like it says. So we have 3 projects to show you for that. Again, a Pine Street project to start. This is the Sister Virginia Mulhern House in Jamaica Plain, which is where I live. This is a beautiful historic convent, which is a convent for the Blessed Sacrament campus in JP. One thing to say about convents and homes for religious, they make fantastic SROs because they have individual rooms, they have gracious common areas and wide hallways, and they're really lovely places for people who just need a room and a place to share. This site plan shows you part of the Blessed Sacrament campus. The church is down here. There had been a rectory just in the corner, but this site was developed for over 120 units, mostly affordable. And then this wonderful little green and pathway that came through the center, which connects all the residents together. And the Sister Virginia House is at the end of that path. It still faces on Creighton Street, its main entry. It's a formal entry. It's not really used that much, I think, but the accessible and wheelchair entry and the end of the path is here from the green. On the basement floor, this has already had plenty of head height. There's again, Pine Street staff and conference room and storage. The first floor, you can see the entry that's used here. It's a wheelchair entry. We have wheelchair accessible SROs on that floor. And then you'll see in the photos, this wonderful large common room that had been a refectory for the religious women that lived here. That's the common area for floors 1 and 2. Oh, I forgot to mention there are 29 individuals that live here. And the upper floors, again, a kind of a rhythm of those SRO rooms and the large wide hallway. There's a manager's studio on the second floor, much like Algonquin Street, a 24/7 presence. And then yet another common room on the upper floor, and this had been the chapel. So it lent itself, once the religious objects were taken and placed in care and for somewhere else, it became a wonderful common room for the residents. So you can see here in the center, that's the first floor common area, and it was there already. All the charm of it was there. We just kind of freshened it up. We did add this kitchen area and a locked storage cabinet for each resident so their food could be secure. So it's kitchen, living, and dining here and all wheelchair accessible. On the upper floor, this had been the chapel. So you can see this wonderful barrel vault here, and it makes a wonderful bright common room for the upper floor rooms. And the wide hallways with the fabulous trim and balusters, that's now home for 29 people. And I love the story that I heard once from one of the Pine Street staff that had taken us through. We had a group of students that did a tour, and she was saying that 2 newer residents moved in, 2 men, and they were really used to not having a kitchen. So they spent a lot of money on fast food and did that for a while before finally deciding to kind of pool their resources and go to the grocery store and buy stuff together, and ended up cooking together in the new kitchens. And so, saving money and also building community by living and cooking together. So I love that story, and I love how the space can it's reached its goal of community there. Mariah.
So this is Abby's House, which is a nonprofit in Worcester that was founded in 1976 with a mission to provide shelter, housing, and services to women who are low-income survivors of domestic abuse or vulnerable to homelessness. The Narrow Gate was hired to work with Abby's and the Women's Institute of Housing and Economic Development on a $16 million renovation of their main building at 52 High Street, which is what's shown in the pictures, which houses their offices, support services, and 56 single room occupancy permanent supportive housing units. The picture on this slide shows the street elevation after construction, and the picture on the right shows the new entry and outdoor plaza. And this whole area basically that you can see had been a parking lot before. We'll show you another before picture later, but it was great to work with Kitty and a few other people in our office on this project over a few years. The areas in yellow on the plan on the left for the basement belong to the thrift shop, which is operated by Abby's House and a huge source of income as well as community for the neighborhood. The renovations included adding a connector between the 2 buildings to add an elevator and a new entry and foyer on the first floor. The scope also included extensive renovations sort of on the rear, on the back, where there's the blue and then purple. The scope there included renovating the Women's Center and adding a new multi-purpose room. And they had a small commercial kitchen, but a brand new commercial kitchen with all bells and whistles for their meals that they serve there. Then on the upper floors, all rooms received cosmetic upgrades, but we didn't do a lot of layout changes to the SROs themselves. the bulk of the renovations on the upper floors were focused around creating the shared kitchens, which Katie mentioned at the previous project, and there's a picture there on the right, again, to allow residents to be able to cook and build community as well. Before the renovations, residents who wanted to cook had to carry their pots and pans and ingredients and go all the way down to the first floor, do whatever they wanted to do, and then bring their food and all their supplies back up to their room. So it's been great to, allow them to have, sort of a home on each floor to do that. And we also had the lockable storage so they could keep, their pantry, dry goods, in the kitchen as well. And we also added a laundry room on almost every floor, where before they had to go down to the basement for that. And the project included also, system upgrades and new historic windows as well. And then just a few pictures to share. On the left is the before and the right is after. Little slightly different view, but you can see, the parking lot basically went right up to the building, and we were able to pull that back and add a new entry sort of at that tower that's in the middle of the L shape, a new entry and a really nice outdoor, plaza space for residents and visitors to enjoy. And then the last slide for this project, again, just some sort of transformation pictures. Women's Center on the top, which is where they serve their meals and do all their activities. And this serves more than just the residents. This is also used for other guests of their other buildings that the Abby's House operates can come here for services as well. And then the bottom picture is what was sort of just a hallway before that became the new reception area at the new entrance. So the place got much brighter, and we've heard great feedback from them that, thank goodness we did this, before COVID, and that all these renovations have helped them survive through COVID, to have shared spaces, but that are more separated between floors and things like that, and just new mechanical systems and things like that as well.
And the last project we want to show you is in Lynn, Mass. So this is on Broad Street, very urban, like Abby's, a very urban setting. The Lynn Home for Women is an over 100-year organization, really interesting organization that started by providing housing for young women coming in from farms and outlying areas, coming into the city to work in factories. And so the Lynn Home purchased these two buildings over 100 years ago, and that became home to 30 women. This is a before picture that showed it hadn't really been upgraded since the 60s. And another issue there is that they had 30 women living there, but there was a lot of underutilized common area. So we did a complete renovation and kind of reclaimed the front of this building to its former splendor, and actually got 43 units included without doing any additions, just by having repurposing space. It's kind of dizzying, all the stuff on this plan, but I'll just say that the wonderful thing about Lynn Home is now, and as before, there's a whole variety of reasons why people are using this housing or need this housing. They might be a student at North Shore Community College, or an elder who's been here for years, and this is what they can afford. Other low income. So it's a variety of ages and life stories of the people that live here. And what's wonderful about what was achieved through the renovation is that now there are, where they had been single rooms and like large gang bathrooms and showers and that kind of thing, now there's a variety of types of living space. You can either have a single room that's shared when you share a bathroom with one other, or you can have what's called an enhanced SRO, which means you have a private bathroom, or there's a studio unit. So we have 7 studio units, and that's what you see here on the ground floor. And so there's a variety of incomes that can be served too. People who, maybe after a while you've been in an SRO, but you'd love to have your own bathroom, and you're able to make a little bit more money and afford that. What's wonderful too about this project is this existing building had this kind of secret garden in the back. And you can see by this large ramp system that it's a big grade change from Broad Street to the back. So the front of the building on the ground floor is underground, but the studios have this view on the garden, which is wonderful. On the upper floor, so the new entries here, and it's all wheelchair accessible. There's our staff and reception, a live-in manager studio, large eating area and living space, commercial kitchen. The other thing that Lynn Home does is they provide meals for the residents. So it's like a boarding house. You know, you have your room and you have dinner, and it's a way to build community here too. And each of the, the two buildings this building provides sort of its own little pod of, although it's connected, of residences as well as this back area does. There we go. And the upper floors, again, that long area in the back was only one story, but you can see we have these little pods of SROs, and each little area has its a small kitchenette and laundry too that they can use. And the upper floor is very much the same. The elevator was there already, so that was a real win. Here's some after pictures. First, the new wheelchair accessible entry here, and after coming through these doors, you're in this reception area. So you can talk to a staff person, you can wait for a ride, you can just chat with folks as they're coming through. It's a great place to see people. Here's the large dining area and the commercial kitchen beyond. What they liked about this too is that, as you come through the reception, you can decide when you're here whether or not you want to come into the living room or the dining room. You can decide if you have a chance to make a decision about whether you want to hang out in there or go to your room. It gives you opportunities to have these in between spaces. And then this is a wheelchair accessible studio unit on the ground floor. I'll just end with another food story. So I love what happens here at these places. The residents told us when we were visiting that, again, they're all assembled for dinner. They're picking up their dinner, and they knew that one of the residents who was a nursing student at North Shore Community College, and she had a major exam coming up that night, and she was going to be late for dinner. But she came in, dinner had been served. They saved a dessert for her and said, and come, let's talk about how did you do, so it was this incredible sense of being supported, in what she was doing and with food as well. So again, we feel so fortunate to be working on these projects that allow people dignity and safety, privacy, and a sense of community. So it's given us a great purpose as well. And just we'll end on some kind of beauty here for Lynn Home. There's that little secret garden in the back that's accessed from the first floor dining area. And you can see it almost feels like a little European garden. They have a huge amount of art in this building too, through a program where art is loaned to them, but they actually have this mural painted on the side of the building, which is two women supporting each other. And then kind of a whimsical thing to end on. So Lynn was a city of factories, the city of shoe factories. So they decided to commission a mobile. It's a neon mobile of boots and shoes hanging in the stair. And as you enter the stairway, there's music that starts playing that's all about walking music, like these boots are made for walking and other things. And it's to encourage people to use the stairs, to keep an eye on their health by continuing to walk, and also a little nod to the past of the past glory of Lynn's shoe factories. So that's our presentation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being interested. We'd love to hear your questions or read your questions in the chat. If you have any, feel free, or even to just call them out. I don't think we're a very big group.
Thank you, Kitty. Thank you, Josh and Mariah. Let's open it for questions. I'm going to open the chat just to see if anybody wrote anything.
Yeah, there weren't any questions in the chat. Just someone said thank you. They had to leave early.
Okay.
Questions?
So I have a question. If I can start. When you're doing these projects, what kind of code are you following in terms of space requirements, and in particular number of rooms to number of let's say toilet stalls and number of parking spaces? Where do you get all that info from? And
Great
Does it
question.
exist?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's a great question, Joanna. So that it depends on which type of housing we're talking about. But let's talk about permanent supportive housing, even in the SROs. So the ratio of toilets to rooms would be guided by the plumbing code. So we have to follow that. I think it's something like 8 people on 1 toilet for men and 6 for women, and so on. Parking spaces, and that comes from the zoning code. And permanent supportive housing, even if it's just in an SRO form and not full unit, they're considered units. Each room is considered a unit. So the parking formula would be created, or would be followed as if each was a unit. Although affordable housing, sometimes there's a if it's a ratio of 1, it's 0.7 or 0.5 for affordable housing. And they also allow you to group rooms, SRO rooms, so there's a reduction in parking, as there would be for traditional. But permanent supportive housing is also, it's multifamily, it's R2. So it's the same as, so every room is a unit, which means it has to be fire rated from one to the other. We follow the same building code as multifamily would be.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I think a lot of the larger organizations we work with probably have standards of their own beyond the codes, things that they know that work well, or even the narrow gate itself, knowing what's done well on past projects. And then there's also, D&D and DHCD guidelines. So there's a lot of different things to reference and make sure you're meeting all of those standards.
And kind of an interesting zoning story, if there can be an interesting zoning story. So I know, and I can't remember how this was initiated, but licensed group residences, the DMH licensed residences, are considered single family homes in many neighborhoods per the zoning code. So that was a real win for the mental health community, so that it would be much easier to cite licensed group residences in neighborhoods that are single family. It's not considered a multifamily.
We have a question in the chat from Selma. Selma, would you like to speak, or would you like me to read the question?
Yeah, of course. So I'm just wondering, to what extent does policy affect these projects on a larger scale, and then if it individually affects single projects? So I just wanted to see what the relationship was in there, or the process as well.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part, Selma. So you said, can you say it again?
Policy.
Yeah, to what extent does policy affect all of these projects, or maybe individually affect certain of the projects? So I just wanted to know the connection and then the process.
So policy, you mean housing policy or?
Housing, public policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great question. And I feel like I don't have, I don't know, Mariah, if you have a thought, I don't really have a background in policy to know, where the direct connection is, and anyone here who might, please pipe in. I know that we work closely with the state, the Department of Community Development, Housing and Community Development, to help shape design guidelines. Colleague Neil is watching here, who's very involved in that. And so, we have a little bit lens or view on what's happening at the state level for affordable housing, and what the what's behind some of the guidelines. But beyond that, I know there's a lot of fighting about zoning policy and outlying neighborhoods other than Boston, so that density can be created for affordable housing. That's been fought for a long, long time, and I think is still being fought. But those are things that come to my mind.
I think it's an ongoing issue. As we know, part of this problem, if not most of it, is the shortage in affordable housing.
Right.
And from what we hear, and Josh, you can elaborate on that. I mean, you mentioned it, 1/3 of, you said about maybe 1,000, I wrote the number down, 1,200, they go back to housing from homelessness.
Every year.
And
Yep.
a year, which is a great number. However, it's not enough probably. One little story I heard that it was a public shelter during COVID when they went to a hoteling to fill the numbers. They said after COVID, you know, sort of 50% of the people who went to a hotel, they couldn't come back to the shelter. They worked really hard on themselves and, you know, with the system to get their own unit or to get into any of these transitional housing programs, depending on their situation, 50%. So I think policy would be, Salma, thank you for bringing it up. It will be another topic probably we can dive into on our next or future roundtable discussion. And Josh, please add to, maybe you know more.
No, I was just going to say, no, thank you. In terms of policy, in terms of internal Pine Street policies, particularly those projects like the one that Kitty outlined at the Men's Inn, a very large emergency shelter project with a very small permanent housing project. And we had to really think collaboratively. So in terms of our internal building policies, our security, our entry, can the new residents come down and still interact with the shelter guests, and how would that impact both groups? So in terms of just very local policy, we try and have a collaborative process from the beginning. And we just, for example, sat down and talked recently with Kitty's team about the potential safe haven at the Women's Inn, and what would that look like for not only the potential new residents, but the existing guests and residents. So I think it's just a collaborative process right from the beginning. We put everything out on the table and then kind of work through, does it make sense, you know, forgetting about the financial side, but does it make sense from a programmatic side first?
So Josh, there's a question for you in the chat. How is the financial stack on these projects? Can you ride off other agencies like MGH?
Great question. So I am super glad I am not the financial expert. So I'll put that out right up front. That is somebody much smarter than I that works on that piece. But there are lots of collaborations where we definitely work with partners who either already have investments or pending investments on projects, and find those partnerships in order to help afford the, you know, you got the brick and mortar side, and then even more tricky is the supportive and the staffing side that's ongoing afterwards. It's really hard to develop those consistent staffing dollars to manage the ongoing needs of the residents. So we could definitely invite someone back that knows more about the more technical financing side, but there's definitely a lot of partnerships, and a lot of folks come to us all the time, at least at Pine Street, with ideas about potential partnerships, and some work out and some don't.
It seemed like with the crisis at Mass and Cass, that if something could have been done with MGH and HUD, and, you know, maybe Pine Street Inn or something for operation, that, you know, one agency could have built something, another agency could have run it, and, you know, they're getting services from the hospital.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential. I know it's super complicated, so I definitely don't have the answers there. We actually, for those who are familiar with the Roundhouse Hotel, the old Best Western that's now in the news, it's run by BMC now. Pine Street ran that project in the earlier part of COVID for quite some time, pretty successfully, and got a lot of folks off the streets, and managed to be a good neighbor. And so it's definitely possible to do some large scale projects that really help folks in that Mass Cass situation, or those, you know, we know that's duplicated across the state in many areas, just not on that scale. So lots of opportunity, and probably some missed opportunities. But
there's a wonderful article about Mass and Cass in the paper today, how the cabins are really helping some people stabilize. And I know your Pine Street's involved in that too.
Yeah, our current program on the Shattuck campus complements those cottages or cabins. So we have those 30 beds I described earlier at Shattuck Shelter are exclusively for folks who were unhoused on the Mass Cass area. And it's beyond low barrier. It's basically a no barrier environment. we not only allow folks to come in under the influence, we do have a private area where folks are using, they can use in the privacy of the shelter structure in an outside space that's medically monitored 24 hours a day. So not a safe injection site, but it is as close as probably we have in Massachusetts right now that's linked to a shelter site, and we're really proud to be part of that.
We can move on to the next question in the chat by Amanda. I just want to say also briefly, those outdoor spaces and courtyards, they help very well in the emergency shelters during the day when these folks need to leave their rooms because of cleaning or what have you, services or maintenance. And by creating those outdoor spaces, and if they can be also multi-season, it helps them not to stay on the street, but to stay in the shelter, however, still outdoor, getting the fresh air. And there is some work on some of these shelters heading in that direction. Next question from Amanda. I have a question about community engagement. How much are the residents and staff involved in your design process?
That's a great question. I'll start, and Mariah, you can chip in too, but I'm thinking of Abby's house particularly because it was really a fantastic programming process with the board, staff, and then with some resident input too. So we had several meetings with that representative group, and we didn't present the design to all the residents, but there was representation of the residents in that group. And a wonderful thing that happened post project too is we had a group of architecture students from Notre Dame, which is my alma mater, that came 5 years in a row, not the same students, but the same studio and professor, and did a wonderful post-occupancy evaluation for us, interviewing residents of Abby's, residents of Lynn Home, residents of Creighton Street or Sister Virginia House, to learn about what was working for them, how the space felt to them, what were the aspects that made them feel safe, made it feel private, so on. And they gave us a lot of great data to use then, in our following projects. So that was a huge gift to us. We don't normally have the chance to do that kind of post-occupancy work. So we did some before and some after.
We have 1 minute. I know we started late. Is there another question? Oh, it's about the outdoor spaces. Yes. Any other questions, comments?
There was one question above it, but I just want to mention, to kind of echo Kitty, that the narrow gate tries to engage residents on projects whenever possible. I'm thinking of some of the, I guess I kind of call them master planning projects that we did with Cambridge Housing Authority, when you're in the really, really early stages of what should we propose to do in these places. And we had open meetings for residents, as well as putting out surveys. And sometimes you get really funny feedback, funny comments, but a lot of times there's really great ideas too that come from that. So it's certainly important to engage them as early as possible, because especially if they're going to be the ones returning to live in the spaces.
Let's do that last question. Thank you, Mariah. Have there been unexpected outcomes in the supported SOR units projects, such as how the common spaces are used? And that's
Josh. That's all you.
Yeah, Josh, how is that going?
I think it's been amazing. I think the most amazing piece was just the movement that happened to occupy those spaces. I know the guests, my first role at Pine Street was serving as director of the Men's Inn. So I'm very, very familiar on a daily basis for years and years now with all of the guests that moved in that first round. And it, in some cases, from when we opened to when they moved in, took months. Literally, for one guest, they were about 50 feet away in a dorm bed from where their room would be. And to get that 50-foot could have been the Grand Canyon at the start. So it took months before it was even ready to open, and months once it was open. So just the success of seeing how happy and settled, and the health and health outcomes, although it's still been fairly brief, the guests, I would say in an unscientific way, seem much healthier, both physical health, mental health. We've seen reductions in substance use. The shared spaces are being shared more than they were on day one. So I think it's evolving, but it's been an amazing transformation for those guests who very, very, very likely would have died in an emergency shelter bed had it not been for this project.
Wow, that's nice to hear. Anybody else? Question, comments, any thoughts? If you haven't had a chance to do it here, please contact any of us. You can find us easily through listed websites or by contacting me, and I can refer you to all participants. Before we close, any other comments?
I'll just say thank you for listening, and thank you for being interested.
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And thank you, Kitty, Josh, and Mariah as well. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us. Bye.